Welcome to the second edition of the International Forum on Digital and Democracy. My name is Andrea Cangini. I'm the General Secretary of the Luigi Einaudi Foundation, which is hosting the session of the forum. Together with other organization partner, Copernicani Association and Re-Imagine Europa, we are proud to announce that this year the forum has been conducted along with the cooperation of 16 renowned diplomatic partners. The relevance of the themes addressed by the forum had led to its endorsement by the European Commission, UNESCO, the Italian Minister of the Foreign Affairs, and unsustainable development solution networks. The Luigi Einaudi Foundation has always paid attention to the relationship between democracy and freedom of expression, long before they became pressing issues of the digital time. Now that the wide development of new technologies making our governance mechanism less and less effective, it's crucial to rethink them in order to allow the whole citizen and not just the elite to benefit from it and be protected from the possible negative consequences. Such is the scope of the International Forum of Digital and Democracy, to reflect on how technologies impact democratic system and challenge individual rights. Innovation is always a two-sided coin, yet, if not regulated fast enough, it becomes hazardous to benefit from its advantages and minimize its disadvantages. While promoting the forum on social media, we encouraged people to vote in a few polls about the topics we will discuss today and tomorrow. Receiving more than 200 responses, the result underlined the current main concern: disinformation and artificial intelligence. More than 90% of the participants believe that the technology-driven disinformation can cause severe fragmentation and impact democratic institutions. I'm eager to hear the outcome of the scientific session on the topic. It's scheduled later today, so stay tuned. 76% of the respondents is not confident that government can regulate artificial intelligence developments fast enough. In contrast, less than 12% believe government can hope. These results suggest another challenge, providing the reality of what I said at the very beginning. Our democratic institution must change to adapt to the digital age and, I add now, also to regain citizens' trust. I must note that this loss of trust is the capacity of governments does not bring people to be skeptical about the effectiveness of regulation per se. Almost 50% of the poll participants believe competitiveness and innovation in Europe could benefit from stricter regulation on digital technologies, versus 25% who believe that a more rigorous regulatory framework could damage competitiveness and innovation. Overall, it proves that citizens have faith in the enabling capacity of policy when properly designed. There will be plenty of time to discuss this and other topics about the technology and the future of democracy, and I'm really proud we, the Luigi Einaudi Foundation, are partners of this event. I will now leave to Patrizia Freeling, Chairwoman of Associazione Copernicani. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Cangini. And thanks to all of you for joining this global discussion. Before introducing our first distinguished speaker, I will have some housekeeping announcement to make. So during the online session, you have the opportunity to engage with the speakers by posting a question in the box that appears on the bottom left of your screen. I also remind you that the forum is running a Best Paper Awards contest. You can rate the 6 selected academic papers that are going to be presented during the conference. The voting ballot will appear on the screen in several different moments during this afternoon's and tomorrow's session. To vote, you just must tick the star, 7 stars is the best rate, directly on the screen. We will forewarn you when voting time is about to open. For a deep dive into the paper, an extended presentation of the paper is uploaded on the website. To access, click the button Agenda that directs you on the forum website, top right of your screen. Now I am honored to open the forum between digital technology and data, political participation and governance, welcoming President Romano Prodi. Romano Prodi was twice Prime Minister of Italy. He was Minister of Industry and chaired IRI Institute for Reconstruction for 2 mandates. He served as President of the European Commission, and during his mandate, he supervised the negotiation of 10 new EU member states. He is Professor of Economics at the University of Bologna, and during his career, he received numerous awards, including 39 honoris causa. Thus, in the Italian media, he is simply often referred as il professore. Welcome, Professor Prodi. Thank you for joining President Prodi. You are considered, together with Jeffrey Sachs, one of the conceivers of the idea of an international forum which spur a reflection on how digital technology can positively affect governance and civic rights. However, since the first edition of the International Forum on Digital and Democracy 2 years ago, we have been facing a global democratic decline. Trust in democracy and election is fading away. In your view, can we protect democratic process? And how can citizens be convinced that the system works for them?
Sorry not to be very optimistic in answer to your question, but in my not short life, I have seen, let's say, a regression of democracy over the world. You know, I do remember my meetings 20 years ago or 25 years ago with the Chinese presidents, you know, in which we were discussing freely, and there was some respect of democracy, curiosity. Clearly, they didn't want to become democratic. It was our illusion that with the increase of wealth, of income, they could be so. But there was an active curiosity. Now there is a sense of superiority. Since the new rules in the 10 years of President Xi, China changed the mood, the attitude, telling, look, we are gaining approval in the world. Democracy is going back. We deliver. You, democratic country, you don't deliver. And everybody will look at us. And if we analyze, to give an answer to your question, it's true, in the sense that from Philippines to Central Asia, to many African countries, we enjoyed the, let's say, the elections in Africa, you know, the flow of it. And now the democratic, the leaders democratically elected, they don't want to go away after the end of their legal mandate. and they transform themselves from democratic leader to authoritarian leaders. And we have this movement everywhere in the world. And so I do hope, I don't say if I trust, I do hope that the revolution, that we have here in the media, so may oblige the democracy to have more linkage between rulers and people, can change the situation, but we make an enormous effort in our electoral system, because when more and more people abstain from election and feel deeply themselves out of the system, it's difficult to countervail the new wave that I mentioned before.
Okay, talking about trust, as you mentioned before, there is this global trustworthiness index developed by Ipsos that found out that the government officials and politicians are the two least trusted categories of people in the world. Or this lack of individual trust represents a challenge, of course, for democratic process. According to you, trust will be more at stake with public administration becoming always more digital, when public servant and red tape will be replaced by software and automated decision?
First of all, it is correct, your question on your side, that to put together public administration and politicians, because in the common opinion, they are power that dominate on you, and this has made a great split in our society. Generally, clearly, you blame politicians because you vote for them, but the mistrust in the direction of bureaucracy is the same, absolutely the same. And I think that in this field, the new media, the new instruments can play a role, a positive role can play, but the problem is the control of bureaucracy. Because if the owners of the new instrument is bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is not under control, the system will be worse, and the citizens will consider themselves even more far away from the democratic process, and the mistrust will increase. And this danger is real. This danger is real because the politicians as a category are many times without instruments to have a dialogue with the public administration in the technical aspects on how they, let's say, dig to have data or put them together or in the coherence. It's my experience how difficult it is to have a dialogue with your top civil servants in what they tell you when you have to take a decision. And so in this moment, why there is the same feeling of the citizen vis-a-vis politician and public administration, but in the decision-making process, the politician is very, very, very often weak in front of the public servant. And especially when in a country you have a strict link among public servants, you may have a two layers system in which the first one, the politician, approves and the second one decides or oblige you to take a specific decision that is determined by the power, specific power of the bureaucracy. And this is the problem. Clearly, what do about it? You must have a exercise, a process of education of politicians to not to become technician, but to understand the consequence of the policies and the instruments adopted. For example, myself, I was very weak in understanding that, clearly the problem is the problem of generation. But I always was obliged to ask to some different type of bureaucrat, or to try to take an evidence of what was told me. And this is why I repeat, deliver a message to the politician to be very, first of all, selective. Second, to try to have always an evidence of what bureaucrats tell you, because the new media, the new instrument will be more in the hands of bureaucrats than in the hands of politicians.
In going digital, the public debates that shapes our politics are opening doors to different opinion, view, freedom of speech and expression, and most notably this happens on social media. However, increasingly often, and of course during wartime, online platforms are used a little like weapon. And this to limit the information flows. Many times internet and social networks are shut down. In your view, could we be done something to counteract this phenomenon?
You asked me whether it would be possible a total disarmament in the world. I don't think it's possible in the sense that these are weapons. These are weapons. Used to prepare power, influencing election, or to fight a war. Same type of instruments. And let us be honest, sometimes you have a way blaming a specific country to have manipulated election. This has always been done and is done by everybody. Of course, somebody has more instrument, more skills, but this is absolutely unavoidable. I repeat, unless you create an agreement to abolish weapons, and I was taken by simply the increase of sophistication of the instruments. When I read about the technical skill of influencing public opinion for election, I remember when I was a child, I was so enjoying the United States Information Service that in the parochial cinemas were explaining how the system, the American system, was, let's say, more open, more full of advantage, and this clearly has become more and more sophisticated, and is now really a normal instrument of political power. And so allow me to be pessimist.
Can international institutions like UN or European Union play a role fostering global digital democracy resilience?
Well, they should play a role, but you must have power to play a role. So you asked me about UN and European Union. Let us distinguish, UN power decreased, and I don't physically see whether UN could organize a shared system to, as you asked me, to help some sort of digital democracy. If you mention European Union, there is some room to do that. And now we have already decisions that make this market more transparent, more under control of the consequence of it. And so my idea is clear that in a system that is heavily controlled by one country or mainly one political sources, the real instrument is to increase competition in the sense of having different sources, different alternatives, and the dimension of the European market is big enough to give a contribution to increase the pluralism of the system that is a foundation for democracy, pluralism. While but we need some sort of more progress to that, because we need not only a political instrument that can be European Union, but a political instrument backed by an industrial structure that make possible to have a voice that makes an alternative to the increase of democracy in the digital field. And now we are very far away from that, So European Union can have more word on the, let's say, strategy of the existing digital oligopolist, let us call it this way. But if you don't have, let's say, your players in this field, it's difficult to exercise power. And if you take the word competitors, the first 20, let's say, digital players, that can be one European, and so it's not easy to dictate rules without having also your hand, your fist to implement your rules.
As explained by our previous guest, President Prodi, EU contribution is fundamental to enhancing democracy, which includes bridging the gap between citizen, voters, and politician decision makers. This is a theme of the next talk. I am pleased to present the Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency, Vera Jourova, in conversation with Luca De Biase, Media Research Director at Re-Imagine Europa.
Good afternoon. We welcome to the International Forum on Digital and Transparency, Vera Jourova, Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency. And we are going to talk with her about the relationship between democracy and digital democracy. Seems to be in not perfect shape lately. And that's also obvious during a war, but the democracy and the digital should be better understood, the relationship between the two. And this forum is set to improve this relationship. So what are the main threats and opportunities that the digital technology seem to bring to democracy?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. This is the very frequent question. What are the risks? What are the good things? And my answer is always the same thing. We have to accept the digital revolution as something which is inevitable. We will never come back, hopefully. We take it as a positive development, but there must be done one thing. There must be values and rules for the digital sphere, which will not forget that technologies must serve the people for their benefit, not vice versa. And we see a lot of examples when the technologies, when they are in good hands and respecting the rules, they can serve a very good purpose. I remember the enthusiasm about the Arabic Spring. Remember, the people were empowered by means of social media. At the same time, we saw the attack on Capitol, which was in fact driven by the still sitting President Trump. So we have a very variable picture. But I want to say that how I see that we need to digitalize democracy and democratize digital. What I mean by that, digital sphere should serve for very broad democratic discussion. Democracy is a discussion. Sometimes it's loud discussion, sometimes it's noisy, sometimes it's wise and long. But what we see in digital sphere, we don't have very broad discussion. We have the bubbles where we stay because they are comfortable for us. We can hardly hear somebody else's opinion once the opinion is different. And that's why we believe that there are more benefits than risks. But when it comes to the risks, we have to look into whether there are some corrections possible. And I don't see any other way than to introduce the rules which apply for normal world. My theory is that we developed rules over decades, rules for democratic society, which have to be upgraded to cover also the digital space. And this is what we are trying to do.
But in terms of policy and rules, Europe seemed to be leading in the world in terms of trying to put together values, as you say, and rules, and by also respecting the innovative pace of technology. This is not an easy task. I mean, it's clear. Is it something that you see this leadership is accepted in the rest of the world, or is it a continuous fight? And how are we going? Is it winning or is it losing Europe?
We would like to convince the rest of the world, indeed. Yeah. And we kind of managed with the protection of privacy, because GDPR became the global standard. And whatever we do in the sphere of digital regulation, indeed, we are doing pioneering work. And what I hear in the United States, not only in Washington, but also in Silicon Valley or somewhere in, for instance, in Israel. I heard the opinion you have in Europe to be the leaders because you have the right instincts and you know what it takes when the fundamental rights are and the rights of people are diminished or are somehow neglected. And this is at the center, this is the center idea we have, that we want to develop technologies in Europe. We are investing a lot of money. We are developing strategies with the member states. But at the same time, we are introducing the rules which say people first. And no technology should have the power to roll over the rights of the individual people. And I think that this, if you allow me to say, philosophical approach or the approach which is stemming from long-lasting tradition which we have in Europe, that we respect the fundamental rights, I think that this is a good entry point for introducing the digital rules, which might work well in Europe. And when I say rules, I mean including the sanctions for breaches. Nothing innocent or declaratory, but real rules, which might also be used as inspiration in a democratic world. I am not naive. I don't think that China will follow us, because for Chinese politicians, and I spoke to them, the digital technologies are a very welcomed and comfortable tool to keep the society under control. We go totally in different direction. We want to have full control over the technologies for individual people, and even for those who are not technologically very savvy. So this is our philosophy, and I believe that, like GDPR, also our fresh rules, for instance, Digital Services Act, Code of Practice Against Disinformation, or AI Act, or AI or Cybersecurity Act, they might serve as inspiration, and Europe and we are very, very much open to share the experience and also to admit if some problems appear, because we don't want the democratic world to copy-paste the systems which already were proven as not fully functioning or something which creates obstacles in real life.
And yeah, there is of course a difference between Europe, the West, and China, but in the West there is a sort of conflict in terms of relationship between the European Commission, Europe, and platforms that didn't seem to cooperate too much until now. They seemed to be willing to not to be fast enough in accepting the inspiration from the Commission. The new paradigm seems to be the co-regulation, so not anymore self-regulation, but co-regulation, and so it seems that there is the need for the real common approach to what we want to obtain with platforms and the digital technologies. But we should be sure that platforms will allow us to understand what happens in their technology and their platforms, a sort of transparency of what happens there in terms of AI, in terms of data. Is that something that we can achieve, or is it a battle that we will fight forever?
I think this is never-ending story. And we saw it in history that there were technologies first, driven by money, and then the rules came last. And just take artificial intelligence. We want this technology to develop and to serve well to the people. And because we had the GDPR in place, we had the luxury to wait with hard legislation. And we first chose for the ethics standards. If you remember, it was 2018 or something like that. And it was the concept which I supported very much, that let's let it settle down. Let's let it develop. And in some reasonable time, we will come with hopefully reasonable rules which will address the risks, the known and predictable risks. So here, in case of AI, we first did this soft law or some set of rules, some declaratory thing, which we asked the technologists to follow. Then the co-regulation, which was, for instance, the ethics code. But then afterwards, we introduced the rules, which should minimize the risks for the people when using AI technologies. And when I discuss with the companies which are developing the new systems, they are telling me the following thing. With GDPR, we were pushed to start innovations on the basis of the principle of privacy by design. So embed the safeguards to protect the privacy of people. Now, there is a new plea or new push. Design the innovations with security by design or safety by design. Because we need to have technologies which will be absolutely safe, also against the cyber attacks. Let's not forget we are in the we appear in the first digital war ever. This is also an undesired, horrible, but at the same time, I may say, interesting experience and new situation we have to face.
That's for sure. And this makes possible a better alliance between the private sector and the public sector that in West face some threats from abroad. In this respect, the idea of improving the platforms is also good for the platforms. I mean, if people is less easily brought to hate speech or to fake news, and the platforms get a little bit more healthy, probably that is good for them too. So we should discuss in terms that put us in a sort of alliance instead of a conflict. Is this something that is happening? I mean, so many changes we see in Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms that are a sort of crisis for them. This is a good moment to propose something that improves their situation.
Yes, indeed, I didn't react fully on your comment about the conflict between the Commission and the platforms. I don't see this as a conflict. I think that, of course, I am the regulator, so I will always think very carefully about what I am told by the platforms, what is feasible, what is not, what is technologically possible, what is not. And here I have to say that we have good continuing dialogue with the platforms. They may not like everything which we introduce through the hard law, but at the same time, they understand very well one thing. If they are losing trust of the users, when it comes to privacy, but also safety, they will be losing money because the business model is of course based on the trust of the people. And I think that we are approaching to the times which I predicted already some years ago, and I hoped I am not too naive, that the people will be more and more demanding regarding their trust, their privacy, their security. They will more and more feel uncomfortable in the sphere where crime is dominating, and here I have in mind illegal content like hate speech or child sexual material or terrorism or extremism, political extremism. I think that also what we see is that the people maybe do not want anymore to be brainwashed by disinformation. I think that now we are in the time when we have to introduce the rules, but they cannot do the magic that we will improve so that it is a decent, fully legal space for communication, education, connection of people. There are no rules like that. The people, the users, the citizens, and I will not say consumers because I believe this is about the citizens, they have the main say in forming it works for democracy or for autocracy, which needs the crowd, easy to manipulate crowd. So I think that here we are entering into the space of for the society to be more resilient and more able to also contribute to, if I may simplify that, better internet.
Yeah. And the internet, this is probably the last question, Vice President. The internet is also beautiful because you never stop inventing and creating new things. And one of the things on the strategies that many would like to see is the strategy, the European strategy for incentivizing the blossoming of new platforms that start from scratch with our values and our kind of transparency, that do what we do now, but better, with less difficult relationship with the platform and their business models. Is it possible?
Well, it is not only possible, it is necessary because we do not want to see monopolies in the EU, which in fact stop or minimize the possibility for the EU companies to flourish and to develop. And when you look into the Digital Markets Act, we are introducing the rules which should enable everyone to develop the company which is focused on innovations and technologies. And not only that, first thing, of course, is to create the rules which enable or which create the level playing field on the common market. It's one thing. The other thing is to give proper incentives to those who would like to enter this territory. And as you know, we have a lot of funding in the recovery plans, where digitalization is one of the goals. And it's not only digitalization of public services or public sector. There is a lot of money to which seek to intensify the innovatory or innovations in the business world. At the same time, we know that we will need experts for the digital sphere. You said that somebody should look into the platforms, how the algorithms work. Well, we need the people who will be able to understand what's happening in it. Like we needed the experts for the data privacy, for instance, when we were introducing GDPR. So our goal is to have 20 million really peak experts for digital technologies, who would work in public or private sector, but who would work in Europe. And also we want to attract the experts from outside. I don't believe that we cannot be the hub for digital innovations. We can be, but we need brains from all over the world. And the third thing, we need to have people prepared for changes. And that's why in our strategy, which is called Digital Compass, we have the goal that till 2030, we should have 80% of citizens who will be fully able to use the digital tools and the digital services for their benefit. So I don't know if I myself will belong to them. There are still 20% of people who should not get lost in the new digital world. But I believe that our strategy is bringing something which is balanced. Yes, indeed, strict rules, but at the same time, good conditions for innovations and smart and relatively quick changes of the society to prepare for the digital world.
Thank you, Vice President Vera Jourova, for your intervention at the International Forum on Digital and Democracy. Your words will be discussed and we will think about them a lot during these days. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, and many good regards wherever you are. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
The concern over AI ethical implication involves UNESCO too. Engaged not only to protect, but also to promote human rights and human dignity, UNESCO recently published some recommendations on ethics of artificial intelligence. I am pleased to present Gabriela Ramos, Assistant Director General for the Social and Human Science of UNESCO, discussing the issue with Erika Stahl von Holstein, Chief Executive at Re-Imagine Europa.
Hello, everyone. As you have seen, AI and digital technologies can be a double-edged sword. And whilst on the one hand, they are benefiting billions of people across the world, they can also endanger societies. Recently, UNESCO issued some recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence to ensure that these emerging technologies benefit humanity while leaving no one behind. And today we are delighted to have with us the Assistant Director General, Gabriela Ramos, who has agreed to kindly tell us a little bit more about the work that UNESCO is doing in this field and her thoughts about how we can deal with artificial intelligence in a responsible way. So Gabriela, first of all, thank you very much for accepting to participate to this event. And my first question would be, sorry, why is it right to be worried about the impact of artificial intelligence on our lives? And what are the main opportunities that we can see with this technology? And how can we help shape how this develops in the future?
Well, I thank you so much for inviting me. It really is an honor to be in this forum, and also with you, Erika. And thank you for providing us this space to discuss how we see it in UNESCO. Maybe your audience doesn't know, but UNESCO, from the whole set of international institutions globally and in the UN system, we have a mandate to ensure that technologies and emerging scientific endeavors are really framed in an ethical manner. And we have this mandate, which is quite an interesting mandate, the ethical mandate. We used it 20 years ago to frame how do we bring about the ethics of the genome, how do we manipulate or not the genome, and how the advances in these technologies could really enhance our well-being. And we are now doing it, and we were pleased to see that 193 countries sign up to the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence last November. And the whole point is exactly as you put it. I like the fact that you mentioned the word shape, because the real question here is who is shaping these technologies how much these technologies, artificial intelligence, which is just the harvesting of data and the analytical the power that is developed with very, very powerful computers and data inputs to produce certain analytical outcomes. The whole point is how much these amazing technologies are being used to enhance solidarity, to enhance equality, to enhance sustainability, fair outcomes, human rights, or how much they are endangering them. And the fact is that the response that we provided in UNESCO when we advanced this recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence is that it depends on us, on the people that are developing it and ensuring that they are really human determined. That is not the machines who decide what they want to do, even though sometimes with the black box that happens, but that is always humans who take the responsibility to whatever the outcome of these technologies provides for. Why do we worry? We worry because without the ethical guidelines, what is happening is that these technologies are just reproducing the inequality that we see in the real world, the very skewed distribution of opportunities, very high concentration of certain countries, of certain firms that are producing these technologies, very high concentration on the data, who owns the data, who shares it. And therefore, this concentration is really meaning that we are just producing very unequal outcomes for people. So the business model is something that worries us. But it also worries us that if we do not ensure that the developments are very careful on the impact of the technologies on human rights, human dignity, fundamental freedoms, fairness, inclusion, what happens is that you might be caught in developments that are hurting our societies. And this is happening as we speak, because it happens because if the data is not inclusive, then you will have discriminatory outcomes. You might not be in the data, or you might be overrepresented in the data, as it happens on the criminal records, that usually you have people of certain groups overrepresented, and therefore the outcomes of these technologies are already biased. They might discriminate against women, and that happens with tools for recruitment processes that suddenly they do not only include profiles that will benefit women to be included in the outcomes, but on the contrary, is discriminatory. They might also provide for misinformation. We have seen how much the misinformation space, the micro-profiling of people to inundate their digital spaces with information that is not factual, can also provide these outcomes. And therefore, preventing from these technologies from reaching these kind of outcomes is really important that we look how do we frame them. And what we have been doing at UNESCO is to very clearly say, whatever we have achieved as democratic societies in terms of ensuring the rule of law, in terms of ensuring responsibility and accountability from the developers and the users and the consumers of these technologies, we need to ensure that they embed in the digital world. So rule of law, and our recommendation is one of the few instruments internationally that is making a very strong call for compensation and redressal mechanisms when something goes wrong. We are calling not to provide with legal personality to AI developments, because as we said, it has to be human-centric. We are providing for avoiding the misuse of these technologies, because one thing is when the tools are used to affect us in our democratic processes. Another thing is when this is used by autocratic governments to survey massively their population, or to go for categorization of different groups depending on their behavior in the digital space that they have access to. And therefore, I feel that these negative outcomes need to be controlled. The point is that we believe that it can be done, and it can be framed, and it can be developed in a way that will help us produce the better outcomes. And we know that these technologies are amazing. We know that we would have never arrived to get the COVID vaccine in 1 year if we didn't have the analytical capacity of these technologies. The kind of tools that we can use for preventing natural disasters, or for tracking trafficking, for example, and avoiding trafficking of people, is amazing, but I feel that it needs to be produced policy-wise. It needs to be regulated. It needs to have a capable governments that understand it and that can produce the rules of the game for the technologies to deliver for good.
That is fascinating. And I have to say, it feels very good for somebody like me, like that an organization like UNESCO has this amazing mandate and does such good work here. And I think you mentioned the word human-centric, which is obviously, I think, the core here. How do we make sure to put humans at the center of the development of this technology? The recommendations of UNESCO suggest that it should always be possible to attribute ethical and legal responsibility at all stages of any AI system's life cycle. How do you think this could be implemented in practice?
The reality is that when you say human-centric, is that it's true that when you look at, for example, machine learning, which is one of these developments, that usually leads to a massive churning of information by the computers, and then the black box, the famous black box, and therefore you don't know what outcomes it comes, because it's not the human that is really looking into the issue. But there is always an outcome. There is always an outcome from these developments. And it's us, humans, who need to determine whether we're going to apply it or not. And therefore, that decision capacity in terms of whether you use it and apply it in the way it is developed is human. And therefore, it's very important to identify the responsibility. It's not as easy because many times these are private firms and they are questions of intellectual property rights, and there are questions of commercial secrets, trade secrets. But the reality is that for us, the most important call that the recommendation makes is that whenever there is harm, there should be responsibility, the allocation of responsibilities and accountability, and there should be a liability regime that allows for these things to happen. We're actually calling for the business or the platforms, but also the governments. When they use artificial intelligence, they should make the person know that this is happening. This is really important. We cannot, there are these main regulations that I think is what I was referring in terms of the rule of law, should be just regulated, should be legislated, should be determined that whenever there is some wrongdoing, some harm, it needs to be corrected, and it needs to have a path by which the person who is affected can receive compensation. But that's one of the extremes. You are asking me about the whole AI life cycle. And this is exactly the kind of approach that we adopted at UNESCO, because the fact is that with the ethical framework, even though the main point is to protect and promote human rights and human dignity, we are also calling people on relying on their own ethical thinking when developing the technologies. And how do you do that? Well, if you're in a room and you are with a smoke-filled room with only men and white men from the north that are deciding on the technologies, that's an ethical reflection. Bring diversity, bring women at the table in those countries that are not represented. Because one of the problems of the biased outcomes that we get is because we have biased processes in which diversity is not represented. 80% or 85% of all the developments on AI are done by male-only teams, and usually male from the north. So one very, I would say, almost low-hanging fruit to get there to improve the settings is that whenever the teams are gathering together, include more women. And you and I have been pushing for it in all the fields, so I continue pushing for this. But because it brings diversity. It's not that women are perfect. Some of us are. No, I'm kidding. But the fact is that bringing diversity helps, and then you need to audit the systems. It's like the restaurants, because people say no, but it's impossible. You cannot regulate this. You're crazy. You will not work because it's so dynamic and it happens in so many laboratories and in so many firms, and it will be impossible for you to control everything. No, we're not going to control everything. You establish the rules. And then you do some auditings. In the restaurants, you don't go to the kitchen of all the restaurants to make sure that every single element and component is good but you have the rules. If something goes wrong, then you go and audit, but also you make some checks. And you go and say, how are you doing this? And these are normal democratic policy practices that we'll need to embed in these developments. And also, I have to say that put the priority right. Is not the trade secrets, is not the excessive protection of IPR. Of course, we need to protect IPR. But really, if something goes wrong, you need to share the code. But as you share your financial statements, if the authorities believe that something is not clear, and you do that because it's within a democratic context and with some reason and proportionality, of course. But we need those rules to make sure that the incentives really push for delivering AI for good.
I think that what you mentioned, and in particular the sense of personal responsibility and creating an environment in which people can, trust that they can be honest about failures as well as successes, I think will be very important. Which leads me to my second question, and that is, how do you think that the development and deployment of growingly sophisticated AI systems should be reflected in education, both for the youth and for the general population?
I think that this is you have the top down. We are saying the responsibility is for the state. They have the duty of care. They need to develop the institutions. They need to develop the capacities to regulate for good. But then there is the individual responsibility, as you said. How do we prepare our children? How we prepare ourselves? Well, first of all, we need to be more aware of these dangers. And this is something that member states also asked UNESCO to create a global observatory of the ethics of AI to deliver analytical pieces to say, okay, what went wrong in this? What is good in that? So that we can inform public. You need to understand what are you getting into when you give consent. When you say, yes, I accept cookies in the internet, people need to understand. They need this media literacy that UNESCO has also produced to upgrade this awareness. But I also feel, and the recommendation does not only have the principles and the framework, the ethical framework, we also have very concrete policy recommendations. And one of those areas is education. Education first, to ensure that the education systems are up to the task to deliver well-equipped citizens to deal with these technologies. For them to understand when they are lured, for them to understand what is wrong and what is right, for them to try to identify when they are being just target of misinformation. These are very important things to protect themselves. But the other part is that we also believe that besides maths, because algorithms is about math and mathematical constructions, and so you need to have very well-equipped people on the basic skills, we also need the more critical thinking. Very important. We have been talking about fostering critical thinking for many issues in the schools. Now with these technologies is really super important. We need to have social-emotional skills. Again, these kind of tools help people be much more prepared to deal with these technologies and to recognize when something is not going good. But also you will not be surprised, Erika, that I feel we need to go back to the question of ethical training. We need to teach ethics. We need to teach ethics in schools again. We need to go for multidisciplinary approaches. We have become so silo-oriented, so discipline-oriented, expert-oriented, that when you have engineers that are fantastic, you don't teach them literature, you don't teach them ethics, you don't teach them philosophy. And the other way around. What was fascinating for me coming from the economics field was to see that 24 experts all around the world, including now the digital envoy of Secretary General Guterres, were developing the recommendation. And surprise, surprise, you have the geeks, you have the engineers, of course you need them, but you also have the philosophers, the historians, the anthropologists, and then you have this multidisciplinary view that allow you really to know better and understand better. And the education is for that, to understand better. And if you are going to apply these technologies for education, because they are also good to increase the learning outcomes for kids, you also need to be super careful. You need to bring the teachers with you. You need to train them. It was telling that some years ago, the OECD produced a report that showed that the countries that have invested more in technological gadgets, the iPads and the boards, electronic boards, and reduce their performance, because it's not about the technology. It's about the people. What happened is that it was disruptive. The class was not prepared. The teacher was not prepared. It only took away their attention to the core of learning. And therefore, it's about us. How do we use that technology and how we ensure that it's aligned with the objectives that we have as humans and as communities and as schools? And that's the core, to bring back the discussion to our goals, not the goals of the technology.
But to one extent, do you think that the future is this interdisciplinary perspective with a stronger role for the social sciences and the humanities? And I think that this is one of the most important perspectives probably for the next decade, after having gone through several decades in which the hard sciences were the star pupil. What is the role of the social sciences and the humanities? And I think in a forum like this that we have here today and tomorrow at IFTAD, I hope we will continue to engage in these conversations, explore these things. In particular, tomorrow morning, we have the debates with the So Big Data Plus group, who will be exploring precisely the role of So Big Data and AI and the human-centric AI approach, and to see how can we continue this amazing work and these amazing ideas started by UNESCO, and how can we also contribute to the working and the next steps of this process. But Gabriella, I wanted to thank you very much for joining us today and to giving your overview of this very interesting work and also how you have achieved this. As a final word, what would you say is the most important step to be achieved in the next year or so in order to advance on these recommendations prepared by UNESCO?
Well, that's a very, very, very difficult question, because we are on so many tracks. But I would say that we need to move away, and you talk about social and human sciences. Social and human sciences allow you to move away from false assumptions. And the assumptions that the governments only need to intervene when there are market failures, or very traditional economic theories, or the assumptions that we have representative agents or average citizens. There's nothing like that. And therefore, we need to understand the human being with all its complexities, because there are no media, there are no linearity. We need to understand the context. We need to understand how do people react, how they feel, how they think. And this is only the role for social sciences and humanities. Maybe the climate transition will be easier if we were focusing more on the behavioral issues. But the core for us is to build capable institutions. I think that we have not invested enough in our governments to regulate, to understand, and to have the strong capabilities to deal with the complexities of these technologies, to ensure that they deliver for good, because that's what we want, and to control the downsides. And that's our focus: institutions, institutional building, even in the most advanced economies, Eric. I'm not talking about only my country, Mexico, or the countries in Africa with whom we work. I'm talking about Europe too. And I think you're doing it with the directives, but more than anything, you need strong institutions.
Well, thank you very much, Gabriella. Thank you very much for joining us here. Hopefully we can come with some interesting ideas at the end of these 2 days of debates, and we'll be happy to send them to you. And thank you for inspiring this conversation and this opening session of IFTAD. So a big round of applause, and we'll get back to you with some ideas, hopefully.
No, I think our approach is also super inclusive. I'm sure that IFTAD and yourself will be super partners to continue implementing this very important initiative of UNESCO.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Disinformation is a topical issue, but it's not a new theme. The first fake news in history, of which we are aware of, it goes up in ancient Greece age. It refers to a letter that was supposed to have been written by the Spartan general Pausanias, according to which he was considered guilty of high treason for his alleged intention to betray his allies, the Greeks, in joining the Persian army. The fact, reported by historian Thucydides, was happening over 2,300 years ago. Now, back to our times. The information session about to start is co-hosted by the Institute for Policy, Advocacy and Governance. It will open with a presentation of highlights of 2 academic works selected from the call of paper launched last spring. First paper, Pedro Panagiotopoulos' papers deals with the emergence of social media and the gradual formation of the platform society. Max Lesser papers examine 2 specific Russian influence campaigns in Italy in connection with the war in Ukraine, and demonstrates how to counteract misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. At the end of the presentation, the voting form will appear, and you will have the opportunity to vote again at the end of this disinformation session. Cornerstone of the session is a roundtable moderated by Rubaiyat S. Shams Anik, Senior Research Associate at IPAG, Institute for Policy, Advocacy and Governance. It will look into misleading web content and how to tackle it. To frame panelist discussion, a keynote on polarization and technology-fueled disinformation will be delivered by Professor Siad Munir Khazrou, Chairman of the Institute for Policy, Advocacy and Governance. And now I beg the director to air the paper presentation. Thank you.
Public space and social media. New politicization, echo chambers, or fora of neo-populism. In this paper, we try to approach the public space in the way it expressed through contemporary social media universe. At first, we start by introducing the term. We remember the initial suggestion of the concept of the public space by Jürgen Habermas since the early 1960s as a field where individuals converse with each other and criticize issues related to public life without limitations and constraints. Famous philosopher conceived the idea of a discourse sphere where practices distinct from those of the state apparatus and in which the issues of everyday life are discussed in a free and unrestricted way. We highlight the overall accessibility to it and the interaction within it, a place where word is expressed by anyone and addressed to everyone. After this, we are examining the emergence of social media in contemporary world. Their initial stage is the so-called platform society, that is the interdependence of these mechanisms. After sizes and interests increasing, we've been moved toward commercial interest and political exploitation. Within new settings, each social component seeks its own place. Obviously, platform societies restructured social dynamics with new cultural imaginaries, practices, and business models. These connections, in turn, brought the deep interconnection of social-cultural activity with techno-economic digital infrastructures. Socio-political approaches are not one-dimensional anymore, but they demand an innovative and multifaceted dynamic. We are looking then about politicization through social media. First, we regard the new audience. This has different forms of information and social practices than those Habermas had in mind. A set of citizens now operates anonymously and in an invisible way due to morphological limitations being in this communication. Some different issues are the commercialization of the media, the users' movements, and specific consumption of practices and products developing. The ancient Greek agora, that is, forum, operates in both dimensions of its concept, both economic and political. Secondly, we see the relations among social media and mass movements. Here, we're looking that social media create new identities or express common ones. Online we multiplies the voices of individuals. Petitions, protests, and activism derive much of their momentum from the capabilities of social media. Discomfort and indignation may initially manifest themselves in a virtual way as cloud protesting, but sometimes relatively soon they will be expressed in the real world. In many cases, however, social media are expressed in an introvert manner. This is our third issue, like an echo chamber. Users choose to enter media where they will only hear the echo of their own voice. A more or less vast area of information or opinions is thus created, which the user himself does not see and does not want to see. Thus, everyone consumes opinions similar to his or her own ones, relays others that agree with them, and constructs a version of reality that is favorable to them. Inevitably, this forms a political polarization, easier adoption of radical attitudes, and extreme forms of action, but also a populist climate. This lack of serious dialogue and critical intervention is a sort of advanced politicization and affects the quality of political discourse. This may also explain why older people, as well citizens with higher education, are more likely to engage in offline political behaviors. Fourth, social media are getting exploited by the governing groups with novel terms of interaction, evolving codes of ethics, and generally opaque control guidelines. Such a mentality becomes particularly important in cases of restrictions and prohibitions. It would be hopelessly utopian and romantic, however, to expect the ruling elites to remain mere spectators of events and not bother to intervene in an advantageous way for themselves. We also see often recently the prohibition of the participation of persons in activities in some social media, that is, blocking. On the other hand, issues arise when citizens consider that the policy of a social medium is directed against them or against the rights of minorities. Of course, it is extremely worrisome for the future, the fact of governmental pressures towards social media for specific actions of a political nature against persons or groups. Finally, in closing, we have to admit that the new term netizenships captures clearly this new reality. Modern political scene differs for sure in many points from the open framework of the public space, as at least it was formulating during its initial conception. It may offer important possibilities for communication, but it also includes aspects that degrade it and undermine its offer to man.
Hi all, my name is Max Lesser and I'm presenting on behalf of the Disarm Foundation, and today we're going to be talking about countering Russian misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and influence campaigns in Italy surrounding the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We're going to make two primary claims here. The first is that cross-platform vectors of attack are used by incident creators in their campaigns. And the second is that the disarm framework and open source framework can be used as a bridge between analysis and response. So considering the fact that attackers can use these cross-platform vectors of attack that involve more than social media, also traditional media such as television and print, effective responses to these campaigns should also look beyond moderating and monitoring social media. So the first case study we looked at involved Russian denial of the Bucha massacre, and as we see, this campaign appeared to have measurable success within the Italian information ecosystem. So what we first did was map incident creator TTP. So these are the techniques that are used by attackers in this campaign. And then we suggested a full range of techniques that responders can use to counter this campaign. So when we look at a selection of the attacker TTPs, again, what I want to highlight is this cross-platform vector of attack. So the claim is made by a Russian state actor on Italian TV, television, traditional media. It's also amplified through formal diplomatic channels. And if we look at the content of this claim, it involves a lot of what we like to call D words, which are commonly used in these sorts of campaigns. So you're seeing these actors dismiss, discredit, and distort facts. And then an influential Italian war reporter picks up this claim, popularizes it in Italy, and it begins to become amplified on social media. So here's the good stuff, a range of suggested responder TTPs that can be used to counter this campaign. The first, one of the most significant and effective, would be forming an information sharing and analysis center focused on countering Italian instances of Russian misinformation, disinformation, malinformation in Italy. Also developing a counter narrative rooted in truth, advancing the narrative that the Bucha massacre actually plays into a long history of Russian atrocities. Also creating financial and social incentives for broadcasters on TV to learn how to identify and counter these sorts of campaigns is also helpful. And naming and shaming perpetrators of these campaigns. So naming and shaming the Italian war reporter who popularized this false claim within Italy. Second campaign we're going to look at involves allegations of biological laboratories beneath the Azovstal steelworks in Ukraine. And this campaign uses this image we see here, which was originally disseminated by an advisor to Putin and then picked up by several Italian TV shows. And this is not a real image. This was alleged to be an image or some sort of military map, military plan image showing a real or a design for a real biological laboratory, but it actually originates from a fantastical board game known as the Generic Universal Role-Playing System. So again, here is an overview of both the attacker and responder TTPs. We do not have time to dive into all of these, but I recommend that you read the paper or go check out the framework online to investigate these more fully. So what we're seeing here is the attackers leverage an existing motif that is featured in existing conspiracy theories that actually date back to at least to the 1980s, a Russian campaign known as Operation Infection. And we're seeing, again, this existing conspiracy theory being amplified while simultaneously developing an original iteration of this narrative. And then to get to the recommended responder TTPs, so you can directly engage with the payload and debunk it, but you can also repurpose the image with the new text. So let's say you create a meme that satirizes the fact that anybody believed that this was a real military design when it actually is a fantastical board game. And also a really effective technique can be engaging with a respected influencer within the targeted community and having them publicly disavow the campaign. But again, this is just a brief selection of the suggested responder TTPs. So to go over the conclusions, what we're seeing here, again, these cross-platform vectors of attack, it's more than social media, it's also TV. Considering that these cross-platform vectors of attack are used by the incident creators, responders looking to effectively counter these campaigns also need to look beyond just monitoring and moderating social media. And ultimately, the disarm framework this open source framework can serve as a very powerful tool to both map out the attacker's techniques and correlate these with a range of possible responder techniques that can be used to more fully respond to these campaigns. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the conference.
Hello, audience. This is Rubat Shamsanik from IPAG. Welcome to the session on polarization and technology-fueled disinformation, steps to disengage and tackle misleading web content. So we are first going to start off this session with a keynote speech from Professor Saeed Munir Khosrow, who is the chairman of IPAG, and he has also he was also the co-chair of 2 task forces under the G20 presidency of Indonesia. Please, let's play Professor Khosrow's keynote speech. Thank you.
Fellow panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, and friends and colleagues around the world. Welcome to the International Forum on Digital and Democracy. The Institute for Policy, Advocacy and Governance, IPAC, is pleased to be hosting this session on a topic which I personally believe is quite important. The topic is technology-fueled misinformation in an era of polarization, tackling misleading web content. Now, we live in rather amazing times. At the very advent of 21st century, we have seen explosion of social media platform, from Facebook to MySpace. Today, as we speak, November 2022, the number of people on social media platform is nearing 5 billion, more than half of the global population. As it happens with opportunity, there's always accompanying risks. But think about the pandemic. How we would have survived this onslaught in absence of the online media platforms? Whether it was taking vaccine or online shopping, we were completely on online platforms. But this has become part of our life. That's inevitable, and that's part of our life. But what also is equally true, unfortunately, even as we speak, more than 80% of the world's population is exposed to fake news. Survey after survey have shown more than 50% of the netizens or citizens of the network are wary that they're being led into wrong information. And I can give you plenty and plethora of examples. And how much dependent we have become on social media platforms. Whether it's breaking the news of a newborn coming into someone's family, or someone's loved one passing away, or breaking news like a war, famine. These days we rely more on social media platform, and the millennials, they're more glued to social media platform-based news as opposed to traditional channels like BBC and CNN and so on and so forth. So this is part of our life. Now, if you look at some of the incident which has been happening, if you remember, in one of those incidents, Cambridge Analytica, a UK-based consulting firm, did end up in a Facebook profile tampering, which apparently led to guiding voters in a particular direction during Britain's referendum on Brexit. During last US election, we have had a lot of issues, and in one such instance, about 100 pages remained undetected by Facebook's algorithm, and which had a view of more than 10 billion views. So these are having serious repercussions across the political spectrum, social spectrum, so on and so forth. Now, what do we do about it? Now, on one end, digital platform is here to stay, and as I mentioned in the initial remarks, it forms part of our life. But what also remains very important, that we as a level of individual, society, nation, behave responsibly. And we have seen some countries taking initiative like Germany, Singapore have taken laws whereby any misleading wrong information in the social media platform are severely penalized, and we have seen other countries follow suit. But we also have to be aware, even as digital platform rises, there's a huge digital divide prevailing in the world. Even as we speak, about 2 billion people do not have mobile phones. 3 billion people don't have internet access. So people who are left out in this game, not being able to access online goods and services, there's an inherent insecurity, which drives into a lot of behavior and makes them vulnerable to wrong information. Even during pandemic, in the very initial phase, about 6,000 to 7,000 people got admitted to hospital based on wrong information. And out of that, almost 700 to 800 died. So we are talking about serious business here. And we have seen many suicides, teenage, young boys and girls taking out their own lives based on wrong information. So this is something serious and here to stay. Now, widening the window. At the political level, what's happening? We have seen a rise of populism, whether it's a developed North American country like US, we have seen a rise of populist leader like Donald Trump, whether it's a country like Turkey in the middle of Europe and Asia, Erdogan, then the largest democracy in the world, Narendra Modi. So these leaders just have their own following. In many, many instances, we have seen the political discourse have been seriously shaped, influenced sometimes by wrong information. So, and we have seen in many instances, people have been led wrongly into believing things which are not true. So that's where this polarization issue comes. How this whole wrong information is splitting the world down in the middle for wrong reasons. There's nothing wrong in having different political differences. Democracy thrives in differences. But what is wrong is when lies spread faster than truth. When lies step into our ecosystem and makes us believe into something which is not true. Wrong information, wrong belief leads to wrong decision. That is what this session is about. How do we tackle this wrong information leading to wrong perception, leading to wrong decisions? Having said that, the crisis we are facing is something, as I said in the initially, has to be faced globally. Even as we speak today, a few days back, 20 of the powerful economies of the world, the G20 community, have met in Bali. And these are the platforms for which the political leadership at the highest level need to frame rules and rules of engagement in the digital platform. And we have seen, instead of that, we are having more cracks. For example, we have had complaints of electoral tampering by countries like Australia and Canada against China. We have had complaints against Russia made by US. So it has to start at the top, when nations first agree to rules of engagement, how they engage in the social media platform. Then it has to trickle down below at a societal level when individuals are responsible in terms of what they share, what they don't share, what they say, what they don't say. So I, having had the privilege of being co-chair of two task forces on digital transformation of the G20 group, have the opportunity to have a closer look what is happening in the global landscape. And we need more collective action, more coherent policy from the governmental level. And G20 is a good platform whereby 20 biggest economies of the world who are driving digital transformation can come together and set some rules for others to learn from and to follow. And also in the developing global south, there is a lot of responsibility. 50% of the largest tech companies are based in Asia, and 4 of the fastest growing innovation hubs are in cities like Jakarta, Wuhan, Yangon, and Hyderabad. So what I'm trying to say, this responsibility is not to say that only developed democracies have to take the onus on their shoulder. It's as much falls into developing countries as well. So this whole north-south and this whole spectrum of collaboration has to move beyond the economic dynamics, has to move beyond the political differences, and there has to be rules of engagement, because everybody has to prosper in this social media platform, and unless we can come together, we'll collapse together. And the whole issue of polarization comes across not only the political spectrum, on a more technological level, social level, individual level, there has to be greater coherence. And if we have to tackle this misleading web content, the collective responsibility has to come at every level. So I'm very pleased that this gives us a unique opportunity, and I'm sure my fellow panelists, when they share their insights, and we have 2 more keynote speakers, will give us a more deep dive into many of the issues. As a keynote speaker, I hope I've been able to read out the bigger picture, so the discussion that follow will help us to take a deep dive into some of the issues, economic, social, technological, that will drive forward digital transformation and bridging the digital divide in the coming days. And one thing we have to remember, millennials who have grown up in this whole social media ecosystem are the future researchers, analysts, political leaders, so on and so forth. So we have to drive fast forward, and we are dealing with a generation in many instances whose attention span is maximum 8 seconds or less than a jellyfish. So in that attention span, we are struggling with too much information. So the information that filtered has to be reliable, has to be genuine, has to be valid. And onus is on all of us. With that note of optimism, I once again welcome you to this session, and I wish success to this whole endeavors, and hopefully end of this forum, we shall be able to come up with some collective recommendations and help our leaders and also other stakeholders, tech companies, civil society, academia, to come together in common drive to make the social media and digital platform safe, secure, which inspires unleashing creative energies. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, everyone. That was a really nice session delivered by Professor Khosrow. So let me introduce the rest of the panel that are with us. Dr. Adrian Rocklish, Associate Professor, National Taiwan University. Nadeem Anjum, Head of Notification AI from Meta. And Dr. Arif Perdana, Associate Professor, Monash University, Indonesia. Welcome, everyone. Now, I would like to start with Dr. Adrian to just share your introductory remarks regarding how this rapid digital transformation of today's era is in a way promoting or encouraging disinformation to spread widely. Please, Dr.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I maybe want to start with kind of like two narratives that exist. So after the 2016 US presidential election, there was this debate about foreign influence. And in the beginning, also scientists assumed there is a strong influence, because on the supply side, we could identify a lot of like Russian sources. We know the IRA, right, the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg. So there were these attempts. However, after a while, so also what researchers could show, the influence was actually pretty limited. So there are studies that really tested where the voters could be influenced with panel designs, and they couldn't find any effect. What we also now, especially in the US context, is that absolute minority is like continuously exposed to really questionable sources. That doesn't mean that disinformation doesn't play a role. It just means like what we consider or what we often label as fake news or fake news sources is not something that the average citizen in everyday life encounters. However, what we also know is that disinformation often comes from the top, and that in political communication, also politicians in their campaigning, for example, negative campaigning in the US, but also in other countries where this belongs to the political culture, is an issue. What also is an issue when mainstream media amplify this kind of content. So actually disinformation campaigns that are successful or really reach a lot of people, and we saw it also before with the Russian propaganda, is often amplified by traditional media. So when journalism actually fails. So that's one story. But the other is like, we can't generalize the Western findings or the Western context, and we just don't know enough about the global South. And that's something where we need definitely more research, and also like where platforms maybe don't fight enough against disinformation. So that will be also maybe an interesting question I can then hand over from our representative from Meta. How is it actually in the global South? Like, are you investing enough to fight disinformation? Because in the US, we know about all these initiatives. Every election in Europe is covered, and we know there are a lot of measurements against disinformation. The question is like, how is it for the global South? So as researchers, we don't know enough, but it's also like very likely that platforms maybe don't do enough in these countries.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Yeah, that was indeed an interesting remark that you shared. We do need to have a very good insight into what social media platforms are doing regarding it. As far as I recall, or as far as I know, they have appointed certain organizations to keep a check on information I think including Facebook as well. I'm sure we would love to hear more from Mr. Nadeem Anjum. I'll give the platform to you, Mr. Anjum, to share your remarks, just an introductory remark about what you think this information is, I mean, how much impact it's creating, particularly in the social media platform. I'd like to highlight, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'll share some of my remarks, and then I'll then get to the specific question as well. I'd first like to start by focusing on understanding why does disinformation like spread, and why does it like spread like faster on social media? And there are like really two concepts that are like behind it. I think the first one is really like cognitive biases of humans. We as humans are like hardwired with like several cognitive biases, and these are just byproducts of how we have evolved. And these have been like good for us in many ways because they have helped us like survive over like other species. For instance, we prefer information from people we trust, but also studies have found that negative information usually gets much more of our attention than like positive information. So we are all like hardwired with these biases, and that generally like makes us like more prone to like fake news or disinformation. The challenge really comes here in the modern era. Modern technologies really amplify these biases in a very large way. So think about a world where we like did not have like the digital age, then the disinformation would be contained within small groups. But with the digital age, information spreads all across the globe faster than speed of light. So disinformation spreads like all across the globe very widely, and that's one of the reasons why this becomes much more dangerous for us, this kind of disinformation. The other key aspect I'd like to touch upon is like information overload. With the rise of the digital age, it has become extremely like easy and cheap to create large amount of like content, be it like videos, be it tweets, be it like memes, etc. So there's a lot of information that's out there, and all that information is really competing for people's attention. And because an average human is exposed to like so much information, they generally let their cognitive biases do that filtering for them. And because of these biases, they generally focus more on negative content, and by nature, they focus more on and give their attention to like fake news. And that's why disinformation spreads like very rapidly on social media platforms and the internet. In fact, there was a study which found that, as the number of memes on the internet increases, the quality of memes that really become viral becomes low. So low quality memes really become like more viral. A study like recently confirmed that. So because of this niche, I think disinformation has been spreading at a very vast rate in the recent times. And there are like two key problems I'd like to like particularly like focus on. One is like political polarization. I'd like to like stress that like internet is not the root cause of polarization, but they definitely like exaggerated. For instance, polarization grew in the US, decades before the social media platforms came into existence. There was also an experiment that was run recently, which found that if people stopped using social media, that reduced the polarization of their views on policy issues, but that did not like diminish the divisiveness we have strictly based on like party identity. And one of the key reasons, social media platforms increase the spread of like disinformation and increase or exaggerate political polarization is that traditionally social media platforms have been designed to maximize user engagement. And because of our biases, because we are more likely to engage with like negative content, these polarized content really like spreads fast. With all of these like information coming to us, there have been like very active steps from like big tech all around the globe to actively prevent this. To like extremely clear, like none of these like social media platforms want to spread misinformation. It's a byproduct of algorithms optimizing for user engagement and the fact that human beings are biased to engage with like negative content. So as we have like learned about this, there are like they're like large organizations, within each like big tech to make sure that we are actively detecting disinformation, and we are modifying our algorithms to make sure that we're not just maximizing for user engagement, but we are also actively removing content that's like fake news, that's like not true. And in fact, as I get into how we like combat the spread of disinformation, it's not like a single person's job. Everyone has a responsibility to really help us like combat this. It starts from the government, honestly. So, for instance, the government has a big responsibility to encourage like independent and professional journalism. The news industry also has a role to play here to focus on like high quality journalism, call out like fake news and disinformation. Technology companies, that will really, the first will really help us like reduce the amount of fake news that's like generated. Technology companies have a big role to play to either like remove fake news from the platform or at the very least to spread its curb, right? And what they really need to do is that they need to invest in technology to find fake news and identify its users' algorithms, to make sure that we are not spreading that. In fact, like algorithms, AI and ML are like very powerful tools so that we can automatically detect like hoax and remove them platform from altogether. Technology companies can also play a very big role in strengthening online accountability. So all of us have like online accounts in this age, but there are like several fake accounts as well. And generally, all of this disinformation is spread through fake accounts. So technology companies can play a big role. And which they're already like investing in a lot is to really identify fake accounts and remove them from the platform altogether. Educational institutions also have like a role to play here. We need to like fund efforts to increase like news literacy, especially like people, who are going online for the first time. It's very hard for them to distinguish between real news and fake news. So education is like especially like helpful here. And finally, like we as humans, the public also has a role to play here. One of the basic things we all can do is that on social media platforms, we can follow a wide variety of diverse perspectives and people so that we are getting a good balanced view of the world and are not just flooded with like flooded with polarized content. And generally also come with the framework that if you see things like online, do not take it at its face value, evaluate it, and generally be skeptical about it. So I think we all need to like come together. Everyone has a role to play here, but I'm pretty sure that if you all do our roles, we can maximize the benefits of like social media and curb the spread of disinformation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anjum. We have a few questions from the audience as well. We'll get back to that shortly. Let's give the platform to Dr. Arif Pardana, Associate Professor from Monash University. Dr. Arif, what would you like to say about the disinformation in the digital age? Please unmute Dr. Arif. Thank you.
Thank you, Anik. So I want to add up what Nadim said about human psychological behavior or cognitive biases related to the disinformation, right? So when we talk about disinformation, we need to understand what causes it, what motivates people, and why they accept it, right? So before we talk whether or not technology can effectively solve the spread of disinformation problems, we need to really understand this root cause. So I would say that the spread of disinformation is not just about technology, but because it is rooted in human psychology. So whatever you name it, disinformation, rumors, or fake news, this is not a new phenomena. So they have existed in human history since the ancient times, as Patricia mentioned before, right? Before this roundtable. So this information here is about stories that attract people, and people love to tell and listen to stories, right? So whether it's a fake or fact, it's the glue of human coexistence that defines groups and holds them together, even though some disinformation can have a very, very detrimental impact to some communities, right? So, but the worst thing is when processing the information, people sometimes do not proceed naturally. So those who have accepted the disinformation, they cannot easily abandon their beliefs, especially if they have a strong emotional attachment to those beliefs, right? Or they may be excluded from their social environment if they refuse to accept the disinformation. So it can be extremely difficult to dissuade people from their opinions, even if they are presented with the facts, right? So this presentation maybe or could cause them to become even more entrenched, right? With the disinformation. So research has proposed solution to problem of disinformation. So basically, there are four categories to solve this disinformation: through the algorithmic, through the corrective actions, through the legislative, and psychological. So regarding the first category, the algorithmic solution. So this is actually the fake news or disinformation is actually the text classification problems. So multiple classifiers with natural language processing, they are applicable to predict whether or not the news contain disinformation. So for example, logistic regression, support vector machine, random forest, they can be applicable to solve this problem. So big tech companies such as Google and Facebook, probably Nadim can also mention and explain more detail on this, have figured out how to tweak their algorithms, right, to discourage fake or unreliable news sites, and also preventing disinformation from appearing in the people's newsfeed. But sometimes these algorithms have some disadvantages as well. They are not perfect, right, when it comes to detecting the misleading contents. And some previous attempts by Facebook also create some backfire, what I've seen from the magazines, newspapers as well. The second category, what I've said before, regarding the corrections of false or fake news here through the fact-checking tools, right? I know that Facebook also have this kind of fact-checking, and some of the platform like PolitiFact and Snopes, right? They use this, but this fact-checking, even though it is laudable, but their effectiveness has not been clearly demonstrated because it's not scalable as well to do the fact-checking for every fake news. So it is time-consuming, and also it takes a lot of effort, right? A lot of resources. And then in the macro level, a more radical approach involves like the introduction of new regulation and legislation to combat disinformation. Like some countries, France, China, Belarus, Kenya, Burkina Faso, Malaysia, and Cambodia, and also Vietnam. So they have this legislation in place. So at least these policymakers at the country level, so they have at least 4 ways to prevent the spread of this misinformation. First, they can regulate the content directly, provide someone with the authority for regulating content, and then redesign the structure of platforms in which content is generated, right? And then also support the creation of the instruments that can raise citizen awareness from the educational perspectives, and then enable them to identify and also prevent the dangers of the misinformation. And then the last one about the psychological, because as I mentioned before, this information is actually rooted in the human psychology. So this psychological solution can be effective as well. Like the psychology call this approach as inoculation, right? It's like what's that? Vaccine for brainwashing. So in this psychological inoculation, so the attenuated challenge, right, consists of 2 elements. So the first one is like a pre-warning of a threat of an attack of one's attitude, and then the second one is preemptive or preemptive rebuttal or counter arguments or pre-bunking. So this can be effective, right? Like a preemptive rebuttal of misinformation weakens the misinformation. Like as I mentioned before, like a medical vaccine often consists like what's that? Weakened virus, right? So there are some research use climate change as the context of this disinformation, right? So in that study for climate change misinformation, so the participants were given some like a vignette and descriptions that some political actors were trying to mislead people on the issues, and then later on the participant will be provided with the facts, that the arguments to refute the misinformation preemptively, right? So then before they were later exposed to the full dose of the misinformation, So they have the mechanisms to defend against the letter exports. So that's the four potential solution for this disinformation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arif. That does sound quite interesting, especially the vaccine for brains that you've mentioned. It is something that we can perhaps influence social media platforms to incorporate, or in other technological platforms as well. So, but however, you know, the policies that you mentioned that governments undertake, or you know, some regulatory bodies, that that can be debatable, because it might introduce you know, some restriction to freedom of speech, perhaps. So we'll come back to that. I'll go back to Dr. Adrian on certain questions. You've mentioned about the failed journalism. So does it, you know, for instance, presenting information in a particularly different way, or maybe in a biased way, does that amplify disinformation? According to you, be it through a journalist, or be it through media contents, video media contents, or even like, you know, still images. So how much effect does misrepresentation of our information, or correct information as a matter of fact, can that amplify, you know, what we call as a Chinese whisper? It ends up as a different information. So what do you think that you know, that have basically that you know, presents itself? Is it, you know, too harmful or not? Please.
Yeah, first of all, that's at the core of like what Claire Wardle defined as fake news. You know, like we always talk about fake news, but when you really define it, maybe you find different forms of like mis and disinformation, or especially disinformation, if it's like intentionally created. It can be, for example, just like this kind of like for entertainment, right? Like The Onion, you read an article, it's made up, but it's for entertainment. That's not really like to damage people, or like to harm people. And then you have like, for example, stories that could be because of clickbait stuff, where you kind of like the headline is totally different from what is the content of the article, and then goes on. And maybe the most extreme form is really like what is pure disinformation is completely made up, everything. But very few stories are like that. Also, when you look at propaganda, what works, it's only like you take something that really exists, and then maybe you change as one small part of the story. It can be the framing that is different, you change a picture, something like that. So that's definitely a problem. But I think what is at the core of the problem, and here maybe I can also use Taiwan as an example, is like when journalism doesn't have the resources anymore to really do its job, if the system is failing. So if journalists don't have the time to do the verification. So at the core of journalism is verification. If journalists don't have the time to verify the content or the sources, then it becomes a problem. And of course, there's time pressure. We see it whenever there's, for example, a disaster event, a terrorist attack or something. They just share pictures without verifying it. There's the pressure because the first one publishes it, then everybody follows, right? There are so many examples where also like Western journalism in general fails, but especially in Taiwan, it's a big problem with the media system. And there I want to also connect to what we heard before from Arif. It's true, the research also shows like fact-checking, especially as a label when we use it on social media and we reach certain fringe communities that strongly believe in something, it doesn't change their mind. They anyway don't believe fact-checking organizations as a source. But in Taiwan, actually, fact-checking plays a role when journalism fails. So fact-checking organizations do the fact-checking. They do basically the real journalism to verify the content, figuring out what is really the truth. And then what is interesting, that a lot of like media outlets actually quote these fact-checking organizations after that. So the influence is not directly on the user or on the reader because they go on the page, because that one we also know very few people go regularly to read fact-checking home pages. However, it's kind of indirect because then journalists use it in their story as a source to kind of like change the reporting about a certain issue. There are also many collaborations. This is again a problem of resources. So basically they externalize this cost, right? We could also criticize that. But that's how it's done. That like a lot of like media organizations, they also collaborate with these fact-checking organizations, and they publish then these stories in their outlets that have like a wider reach. So this is also to finish my comment. It's very important to always consider the national context. Like also as researchers, we know the US extremely well, and we always assume, or especially people from the US, they always assume the US is the case we have to generalize. But maybe the US is a rather unique case, and there are other countries, we could take the typical European country, to generalize, and it's very difficult to transfer that knowledge or this assumption to the Asian context, whether it's Taiwan, where I can really talk about, but also like other Asian countries, as you probably all can confirm.
Yes, definitely, that does make sense. But what do you think can be a substitute for, fact-checking? Since fact-checking is, as you mentioned, is not being that effective, and I think Dr. Arif Pradhan also agrees with it. So, if fact-checking isn't working, what should come instead of fact-checking institutions or maybe social media platforms? How can we verify or influence that a message that it's fake or it's meaningful or trustworthy?
I mean, it's also interesting what Arif mentioned, all these different approaches. I think we should all consider them, but you mentioned it already, and maybe later we talk about it. Regulating, we should be very careful. I say that also like as someone who analyzes authoritarian countries. We should be very careful how we define the truth. If we say the government should define the truth, and as soon as these regulatory tools are installed, it's very, very difficult to get rid of them again. And some of these authoritarian countries that were mentioned, actually, they mistreat these tools, we could say. The other thing is, like, of course, social media platforms should do their best, what they can with algorithmic interventions, that they, for example, can say they don't amplify certain content anymore. They maybe can also delete certain content if it's possible. But in general, I think stronger journalism helps, definitely. We see that countries that have like strong public service media, they have maybe less, or they're more resilient, we can say, against disinformation. But there's also the social aspect. Like I think when we think about disinformation and why it works in certain countries, that's also like a kind of like a social question. It cannot be purely solved with fact-checking or technical solutions. I think this is something we should keep in mind.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adrian. That does sound promising. I think, but we have to quite rely on technological platforms such as the social media platforms on intervening and delivering such a action or implementation. I'll go to an audience question. I think it's meant for Mr. Anjum. It's from Giuseppe Attardi, and I'll quote it. Misinformation is an elusive concept. More often, we see distortion or abuse of true information. For example, in Italy, the government claims that France only accepted 35 migrants from Italy. However, France overall accepted 150,000 migrants more than Italy. Both are true, but they are used to support different points of view. Is misinformation not the real problem, but the misuse of information? It's meant for the whole panel. Please, anyone who would like to answer the question. Yeah, Mr. Anjum, if you.
Yeah, I can start. So I think, yeah, it's true, basically. In my perspective, I think there are like two aspects of the problem. One is misinformation, which is like very real as well. There are like a lot of like bad actors who intentionally try to create like fake news, and then that gets like spread vast throughout the internet. I think that problem exists. But the other problem, which was like rightly raised in this question, is basically differences in opinions. You can view a fact from a different lens and project it in a different way to make a completely different meaning out of it, right? And I think, yeah, they are both problems, but the solutions to both are, often like identical. For instance, if you want to bring in like algorithmic interventions for it, we can have like algorithmic interventions for both kinds of problems. So yeah, so I think to summarize, I think both problems exist, and we need to be solving for both, in my opinion. Would love to hear from other panelists as well if they have an opinion.
Please, okay. If Dr. Arif Pardana or Dr. Adrian, if you'd like to share your 2 cents. We'll start with Dr. Adrian. If you want to share anything regarding this question. I mean, there's 2 different types of information which is correct, but it's biasedly presented. So how can we differentiate, or how can we manage this type of a challenge?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent example. It also fits very well what Wordle shows. Like, there is not like the fake news and totally made up versus everything is true. I think it belongs to the area. It's probably like we could count this as political conflict or political speech. It's this kind of area where we should be careful. I think it doesn't fall under any kind of regulation. It's probably something we need to endure. Every political debate works like that. So again, this is like it's a general issue, we could say, in politics, and then it depends on good journalism, I would also say, that covers it. That is kind of like challenging that. But there are also journalistic cultures that say, like, you're not going to challenge political speech, right? Maybe we could say in the US they are holding more back with that, especially during election time. We also see that actually with Meta, with the decision when Donald Trump now runs again. They say whatever he says shouldn't be fact-checked, right? That's also like a kind of like shows a different cultural approach, whereas maybe in many European countries, politicians are often challenged, especially in the talk shows when they make these statements. So as a citizen, I would say we can't expect from the average citizen, give them the burden to do on their own this kind of like fact checking or checking that kind of information. I think it's really again like I sound like a broken record, where we need good journalism, and when we have good journalism, then this won't be such a big issue.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Another question from the audience. I think this is what's meant for Mr. Anjum from Meta. How independent is Meta Oversight Board from Meta, being funded by Meta, and thus expenses need to be approved by it? The Oversight Board, I think.
Yeah, the Oversight Board is part of Meta. So basically it's part of the entire organization, and it's funded through our regular budgetary process, right? But this does not really create a conflict of interest for us, because ultimately we are here to provide the best value to our users, and we really believe in like long-term user value we provide. And it is our view that if we are providing or encouraging like disinformation through our platforms, that will result in providing us like bad user experiences, and that will in turn be bad for the business. So I think it's not really a conflict of interest for us. Investing in removing disinformation, investing in oversight is like very well aligned with our like business goals and objective as well.
Thank you. I'll go to Dr. Arif for briefly regarding that you mentioned the vaccine for brain, an interesting concept. Let's explore that. What do you think? Like, how can we influence the human psychology, or is it too ambitious? So that we do not adhere to misinformation. Anything regarding this vaccine for brain or any other forum that we should try to approach to like root ourselves or strengthen the human psychology in general?
Yeah, So I think that's one of the potential solutions other than like algorithmic interventions, right? So like I mentioned before about the psychological inoculation, I forgot, inoculation, sorry, that's the tongue twister word, inoculation. And then probably like gamifications. I forgot, there is one website that provide gamifications where people can understand how actually the fake news is created, and then it involves the from which sources, the accuracy of the the accuracy of the content, right? And then another things is like providing the warning whether the content that you want to share is actually accurate, whether you understand where it comes from. So actually it reminds people to be aware of what they are sharing, right? So that's actually the things that we can do to try to tweak human behavior, or to intervene their cognitive biases. Yeah, I think that's one of the potential solution other than a technological solution. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you. We'll come back to Mr. Anjum for a bit. Another question that we have is, can we contain the disinformation wildfire within the boundaries or to certain sectors? I think this meant as in within national boundaries, if something so that it does not escalate further, or maybe to certain other factors that we can limit it to, so that it does not maybe, you know, amplify any misinformation in general.
Sorry. From what my understand, as I mentioned before,
the
what
question? Sorry, sorry to.
This is for me, or
for Mr. Anju?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Can we do it? I mean, yes, we can, but I don't think that's the ideal solution. I'll tell you why. So the key to curbing misinformation is to really identify it. And if you're able to like identify it, the ideal thing would be to like remove it altogether and not just curb it within a certain nationality, right? So I think identifying, especially like algorithmically, identifying misinformation is a challenging problem. We are making progress towards that, and it comes with a certain level of accuracy. It's obviously not 100% accurate, but our goal here is that if you do identify misinformation, just remove it altogether. I think that's a better solution than curbing it, in my opinion.
All right, thank you. And how much? I mean, it's a question from myself. Like, how much can we rely on technologies such as AI to, you know, identify and tackle this disinformation that is probably created by a human mind? Can we rely on AI sufficiently?
In my opinion, we are making progress towards it, but AI alone is like not enough here. It's basically a multi-stakeholder problem where, like I mentioned, the news industry, the governments, the technology companies, the educational institutions, and generally a more educated like public, all of us like play a role in being able to like tackle it. AI plays its role, but at least in the current state, it's not self-sufficient.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anjum. So last question of the day I have is, if we focus on young audiences in general, they are quite vulnerable to disinformation because they do not have certain experiences or certain knowledge that they need to process and some information. So what can be done in this sector? It's the question to all the panelists. I will start with Dr. Adrian. Sorry, please, Dr. Arif, you may proceed.
Okay, so even if we train AI, right? So there are certain criteria that we have to put in the AI. So for example, right? This information, mostly they have like bad style, bad spelling, bad punctuation, limited vocabulary, using terms of abuse, presence of emotions, informal language, curse word, incivility, ungrammatically, right? So we have to put this as the criteria when we train the NLP, when we train the model, right? So we can use this to educate young people as well, because we cannot just rely on the AI. So we have to create kind of awareness, educational platform. If you look at this information, you have to be aware of this criteria. So I think that's one thing that we can do other than like a vaccine for brainwash that I mentioned before, providing gamifications, intervene their cognitive biases. So this education can also be leveraged as well.
Yes, that does sound quite promising. A follow-up question. I mean, there are kind of like more mediums of like of the disinformation. It might not be just text form. Now there are video forms, and an interestingly new disinformation method is, I would say, deepfake videos created by AI itself. And we recently saw a deepfake video of President Zelensky delivering some misaligned speech, perhaps, which was aimed to create chaos or create some distraction. So what can be done to tackle this newly emerging forms of disinformation, such as the deepfake videos? Dr. Arif and Mr. Anjum can join in as well. What do you think, Dr. Arif?
So this is actually quite challenging questions actually that needs to involve technology to understand whether like such a video, whether it's a fake or not fake, right? So for, let's say, for a layman person, right, it's quite difficult for them to differentiate this is real person or not real person. Sometimes I myself even it's quite difficult to see whether this is fake or real person, right? Because it's too soft, and then the movement is like pretty similar to the human movement, right? So I think there should be more understanding about the technology. So how this technology, right, could create detrimental effect when we ourselves, right, have no idea, have no sufficient understanding when we look at that. So I think that's my opinion.
Fabulous. Mr. Anjum, if you would like to add a comment?
I'd like to that. I definitely like second that. It's like difficult to like identify for a layman human whether something is like real or like a deep fake video. However, I think there are two aspects to it. One, I think better education can help. And actually, if you like pay very close attention to a deepfake video, there are like certain things that can help you identify that it's actually fake. For instance, deepfakes are often they fail to fully represent, the natural lighting or the natural facial hair, or if you pay close attention to things like the lip movement or moles, etc. So by paying like really close attention, it's possible to possibly flag that something could be a potential deepfake. So I think one idea is education, so that people can pay close attention to it and identify it. But the other aspect of it is really, if you think about it, if AI is able to create a deepfake video, AI should be powerful enough to detect it as well. So using similar features like I mentioned, right, by paying very close attention to certain like facial features, we can train an AI that is able to like predict whether or not a video is like fake, and being able to like flag it, remove it, or at least like give a warning to users that, hey, this might be potentially like fake. Use your own judgment here.
Okay, that sound quite promising in terms of a solution. I'll come back to the final question again. That is the young audiences. What can we do to help them not be a victim of disinformation in this digital era? Because they are quite, involved in technologically, technologies such as social media platforms and even all types of audiovisual platforms that exist. So what can be done to help them? Question to the whole panel.
Sure, I can share some of my thoughts. I think the key thing to understand is that with young people, they are like in their formative years, and so that's why they're like much more prone to such disinformation, right? And they're like much more impacted by it. I see like disinformation like as a knob. So let's say if you focus on like algorithmic solutions, for instance, it's a knob between how much disinformation versus true information you actually want to share. So if you go on the very extreme, you can get like good at curbing disinformation, but you'd also like curb out some useful information. So So really, like for young people, I think the focus should be on reducing as much disinformation as possible at the cost of even potentially removing some like good information, because on balance, I believe that will be like positive for them. And there have been, a special version of like apps for like young people, like YouTube for Kids, for instance, and they're really designed to make sure that we have like authentic like sources, and we do not like just keep it like a free for all platform, and we have like special quality checks for them, especially to ensure that the young vulnerable people do not get exposed to disinformation. But that does come at a cost, like they're probably getting shielded with some good information as well, but that on balance is like a worthwhile trade-off in my opinion.
Yeah, that does sound quite interesting. If the other panel would like to join regarding this.
Yeah, maybe a counterpoint. I think first of all, we should trust more young people. In general, what we also know from research, humans are not as gullible as we often describe them, especially in the public debate. This is one thing. The other is like, especially old people, these disinformation studies that show who share the most or are most exposed to, actually they show that especially older people, in the US context at least, are the ones that share that kind of content. So then again, it's like we of course should care about young people, especially when we talk about like young people under 18, right? Because in these studies, usually we focus on 18 or older, right? So of course that's very important, but at the same time, we shouldn't forget, if we look at what is shared or which communities are most affected, at least in the US context, it's older people. So that's as a kind of like a counterpoint, and we shouldn't forget them.
Yes, definitely. That is a very interesting point. We should focus on elder population as well, and there might be other minorities also who are being maybe overlooked by us as well. We're not aware, so we should look into that as well. If Dr. Arif Pradana, would you like to add any points to that?
Yeah, just want to add a bit of Adrian said before. I agree. We have not just focus on the young people, but also old people. Even in my WhatsApp group, for example, old people like to share the hoax actually compared to the young people. And even in Singapore, for the education purpose, right? They create a video that actually the focus is actually old people sharing the hoax or disinformation. So I think the challenge is to educate old people actually, because their mind have already entrenched with the misinformation bias, right? And then for the young people, we have to say that there's no problem with differing opinions, political views, but the problem is about lies when they spread faster. So that's young people needs to be aware of. For old people, that's really difficult for us to change their mind, especially about the political views, about their religious views, something like that, right? So I think we should be aware of when educating young people, and also be aware of old people also has also shared this kind of disinformations as well.
Yes, that is the very important point. We do have an elder population being the new victim. I guess it has something to do with their, they're, I think, new to technology, or maybe they still struggle to differentiate what platform to trust. So yes, we do need to focus there. We got some really insightful points, really insightful discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Thank you, Mr. Anjun. Thank you, Dr. Arif. It was a very insightful panel indeed. And that concludes the session today on disinformation that is being fueled in the digital technological platform, basically. Thank you, everyone, and stay tuned for the next sessions.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Buongiorno. I'm Gianluca Misuraka, and I'm one of the members of the scientific committee of the International Forum on Digital and Democracy. And I'm here today with Vincenzo Acquaro, my good friend, and that is the chief on digital government of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. So Vincenzo, recently at the United Nations General Assembly, you presented the survey, the report with the survey 2022 on e-government. This is a reference, it's a flagship report, it's a reference worldwide on what is the status of e-government or digital government worldwide at the global level, and since 2002 it has been let's say weighted by everybody, policymakers, practitioners, researchers, to understand and analyze the evolution of the digital government, as we say. And so this is after 20 years, I had the pleasure to be involved with you and colleagues in the expert group meeting on e-government, exactly also to reflect on how eventually say modify and redesign and reconceptualize the framework of the analysis. But definitely this year is after the COVID, this is a very timely picture of the situation of the digital transformation worldwide. So can you let's say provide us some let's say an overview of the main findings and key results?
Thank you Gianluca, buongiorno a tutti e grazie per avermi invitato in questa conferenza. As Gianluca said, recently we have been launched the 2022 e-government survey during the General Assembly at UN, and the title of the report is The Future of Digital Government, and it's very interesting because what we have analyzed based on the assessment that we do for 193 member states. So we cover all the United Nations member states on digital development, is that despite the also not only challenges but opportunities that came up with the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw two different megatrends. A group of leading countries and the countries that are more advanced on digital transformation, they were really taking advantage of this situation, and the fact that they were almost ready to put almost all the services online. They really react more proactively, and they were able to cover as much as possible services to the citizens through the digitalization. On the other hand, we have half of the world that is still lagging behind. So the key maybe mega trend that we observe is that the trend is that we have two big groups, a groups of the most advanced and the group that are lagging behind. And this is somehow a very it's something that we would like not to see, because we are working in direction to bridging digital divide. But the new technologies, the new trends can also create a new barrier and create a new way of digital divide. So this is one key message. Still, all the countries are moving up, but not with the same speed, not with the same pace. So this is something that need to take attention to all the governments.
Grazie Vincenzo, thanks a lot. And yes, indeed, this polarization that we see is somehow also reflected, we know, on, let's say, on the political, sphere of our life. And in this conference and the International Forum on Digital and Democracy, clearly, the political aspects and how technology influence, society and policy, it's key. Having worked with institutions, and especially with you and Des, I know in the survey, I know that you're not focusing on the political aspects of the governance frameworks, but on the other side, you have a sub-index of the famous EGDI, the e-government development index, that looks at e-participation. So maybe can you provide us some insights also on this?
Yes, thanks for this question, because it's more than the e-participation index. In this report, we have a chapter that is on leaving no one behind. It is about inclusion, because one of the key challenges now is really how there is not only a digital divide, but there is an issue of digital inclusion that need to be covered. So the chapter look at how governments need to work in order to provide services for all. As I said, there is a gap among countries, but even in the countries, there are big differences, and there are vulnerable areas, vulnerable groups that are really lagging behind. So this is worldwide. So no matter the level of the digital development, still there is a strong room for improvement on citizen engagement, citizen participation, and we measure through e-participation index. That is organized in three main components. The first one is about e-information. The second one is e-inclusions. But the most important one, but the most difficult one to assess is the e-decision making, because we can observe many countries that now have portals in which citizens can really express their opinion, make recommendations, request improvement changes and new services. But what is very difficult to measure is how much, what is the impact of this of the citizen engagement in these societies. How much government are really taking seriously in consideration the citizens, and how this reflect in decision making with concrete law, services, and so this is something that we are trying to measure as much as possible. There is a lot of room for improvement from the government. One key message on this is that while we are all fans of technologies, we and in Italy, as part of European Commission, there are very key principles on digital by design, digital first. But now it's also important to put inclusion by design. First, we have to look at the human aspect. That's why we are pushing, saying something that is not new, that the society is hybrid. So digital technology, digital transformation should be used as a public good to serve people. So again, have to be people-centered.
Well, thanks, Vincenzo. And as one of my hats is to be the lead of the InTouchAI.eu, the International Outreach for Human-Centric Artificial Intelligence. So this human-centric digital transformation is a key and fundamental, of course, for the future of our society. And I mean, here in the conference, we have been discussing, we will discuss a lot about exactly the decision-making mechanism and how technology can help enhance this, because as I always say, and I'm not the only one, of course, I mean, if we are talking about industry 4.0, society 5.0, also in Japan, for instance, definitely we cannot have a government that is almost analogic in many countries, 1.0 at most. So we really need to innovate. We need to be radical in the way we change, our public administration and our institution, redesigning them also in a co-evolutionary manner with the technology. And now, of course, we will also have this opens a lot of questions for the audience, for the scholars and researchers here, also for policymakers, because of course this is the key issue to be addressed not only here in Rome in this conference, but worldwide. So, before to conclude, in fact, and talking about the future, how can we be inspiring for the futures that we want? So the title, as you said before, of this report of the survey 2022 of the United Nations on e-government was the future of digital government. So how do you see what is your perspective about the future?
Well, it's not about my perspective, but we have another chapter. It's the last chapter, chapter 5, on the future of digital government. So I really encourage the one that have not had the opportunity to read the report we're talking about 300 pages. There are a lot of data analysis. So I would suggest you to read it, because you will find some good insights and good information. But thanks for this question, because indeed the new technologies, the cutting edge technologies are already projecting some countries in the future. What is very interesting to observe, and the assessment of 193 countries give this picture, that you have countries already in the future and countries that are still lacking in the past. So some concrete cases can give you the idea of what will be the future. I'm talking about cloud computing, that now many countries are moving. I not want to spend now time discussing commercial, hybrid, that's we know. Every government will look at what is the best solution for them. But indeed, that is one trend that is already in place in many countries, and in some cases also is the best solution when you are under crisis. There is a concrete case study in the report, what is going on in Ukraine, and thanks to the digital transformation that moved the digital government on clouding, they were able to move outside the countries all the data centers and all the assets of the government, and be able to support citizens while they were under conflict with Russia. So this is but then also the trend is about the seamless. It's seamless government, anticipatory government. Really, you have not to bother the citizen asking always the same questions or asking the same information that are available at governmental level. No matter which level of government we're talking about, the responsibility of the government is really to use as much as possible all the information to anticipate some services that are part of the life of citizens. And so what we call invisible government. Why I need to check when my driving license is going to expire? You have to immediately send me the new one, because you know that when is and which kind of information you need. You can quickly get from your database, or at least you need to inform me in advance that I have to do a new medical test, and you have to book the medical test for me, and not that I am going to do so. This is just one example. So the direction is that, but I want again to raise the flag, the red flag, saying that new technology should include. So we talk about digital goods, so have to be for everyone. So when we develop this system, we need to look at all the variety of the societies and all the different vulnerable groups for this. But that is the trend that we cannot stop, and definitely the future will be much more better, and the life I hope will be easier for us as the citizens.
Thanks, Vincenzo. This, of course, is the future. I mean, we want. Of course, we also know there are challenges and risks, and but this will open another debate. So for the time being, I mean, I also want to congratulate again you and your team for the excellent work you've done with the survey report this year, and you have done in the previous year, and you will keep doing in the future. Although we all know that there are limitations in this kind of exercise, there is a richness, and is a compendium of case studies, of experiences, as you say. So although everybody is looking at it like for the naming and shaming approach of the ranking, on the other side there is this knowledge exchange, the best practices, and that all the community development is really looking forward each time you publish this report. And so also for the audience, and we have more recently at the ISEGO conference in Guimarães in Portugal, where we had the expert group meeting this year on e-government, and clearly there is now the opening of a new phase for the next edition of 2024, where we also are gathering say insight, input, suggestion for improving the approach, the methodology, and how to better let's say capture the multi-dimensional facet of this digital transformation. So thanks again, Vincenzo, and yes, as we said, I think the future is inspiring, and technology can definitely help us to move to a better future for all.
Thank you, Gianluca.
Parlando. Allora, prendiamo il trottinetto, facciamo prima. Cioè, siamo solo sul lungotevere. Bene, buonasera. Questi sono these are the final remarks for this first day of the International Forum for Digital and Society and Democracy. And I'm not Monica Maggioni. My name is Luca De Biase. I'm here to just summarize very briefly what happened today. So first thing, worries about democracy and digital are real. Digital can be effectively used to erode democracy. I mean, fragmentation is there, is in society, inequality is in economics, but digital can be polarizing and, of course, can be radicalizing different opinions. So can we do something to make digital big, great again for democracy? Society can do a lot of things. We know about fact-checking. There is a lot to do by studying. This is something that in this forum is shown very well. We can study this. We can educate society and have a more literate society. But there is, of course, policy. The old frame for policy was do whatever you want. Clinton and Gore started this paradigm in which the digital is good per se, and so they had to be able to just do everything they wanted. The new paradigm, after almost 30 years, is that digital is part of the normal life, so is normally regulated. It's not easy to regulate it because it is a complex system, but we can frame a new regulation, and in Europe we are doing so. And Europe is leading in terms of re-regulating the digital and making it a normal part of society. But this will not be enough. It's not enough to regulate. It's very important to incentivize, to help the blossoming of new platforms, new environments in which develop the relationship between citizens and their ability to help a new phase for democracy. We can incentivize new digital solutions with the right values by design, embedded in them and in their designing process. This is going to be a discussion also for tomorrow. We'll start at 9:30. And of course, I thank you very much for listening. And don't forget to vote for the best paper. After I finish, you'll see it on your screen. Thank you again. Good night.